In part, you have to, if you look at the long history, there's actually been a sanctuary city status in New York for many decades, and it has been implemented by even Republican mayors like Giuliani going way back. But where we went awry, and this is really a great example of, my campaign as a lifelong Democrat running as a centrist Democrat against the radical left that is in a one-party dominated city like New York has sort of hijacked our city and taken us too far to the left. We passed additional sanctuary city legislation in 2018 that basically made it impossible for local law enforcement, if they, for example, arrested someone who committed a violent offense. Let's say they're a Venezuelan gang member. This, in fact, happened last week, and it was the seventh time this guy's been arrested this year. And this is crazy. On his first arrest, local police should have turned him over to ICE, and they should have deported him on the next plane to Venezuela, obviously. And because of this crazy legislation that went much too far back in 2018, New Yorkers, it's contributing to the violent crime spike here in New York. So I'm going to roll back the sanctuary city back to the way it was, for decades, where, I have no interest in helping the Trump administration try and deport 12 million illegal immigrants who mostly have been here for quite a while and are hardworking and contribute to our economy and aren't committing any crimes. Let's focus on the dangerous ones and get them out.
How do you run as a Democrat then, Whitney? Because it seems as though that party on the left has dismissed the narrative that any of these immigrants cause a spike in violent crime. And yet, here in New York, you've definitely seen crime run unchecked. The police haven't really been able to do much about it. And the homeless and drug addiction problem seems worse than ever as well.
Yeah, it's a big problem. Only 37% of New Yorkers surveyed say that they believe their neighborhood is safe. That's down from 50% in 2017. And that is reflecting the reality that since crime bottomed either just before the first year of COVID, when everybody was shut down, sitting at home, crime has spiked back up. Nothing like it was when I first moved to New York 31 years ago. But it's definitely crime and disorder are up, and people are voting with their feet. We've lost 500,000 people, 6% of our population, the second worst of any large city in the country since the year 2000. So I agree with the majority of New Yorkers. The city's heading in the wrong direction, and that's why I'm stepping forward to turn it around and be a centrist, business-oriented Democrat like your founder, Mayor Bloomberg, was. And look what's happened to the city in the 11 years since career politicians got in and have been screwing it up.
Well, Whitney, let's take this conversation specifically to the subways, because crime and safety on the subway is obviously top of mind for many New Yorkers. And we talked about this a little bit, but what specifically is your plan when it comes to the unhoused, the mentally ill, getting them safely off the subways?
Yeah, and it's not just the subways, of course, it's out in our streets as well. Big picture, if I were to summarize my plan to reduce violent crime by 50%, and I'm pledging to New York voters, if I don't do that, vote me out in 4 years, is big picture, 6 words: let police do their frickin' job. And they want to do it, and we've tied their hands. The 3 words that are the antithesis of my plan is defund the police, the 3 dumbest words of all time, and that embodies the radical left views on this. So it is homelessness in general, mental illness. It's a big issue. And if we had an hour to talk about it, I'd love to dive into the weeds. But basically, we need to reform the bail law that I was actually initially an advocate for, but ended up opposing, that passed in 2019, that ties judges' hands. So you get a revolving door of putting dangerous people back out onto the street. As I mentioned earlier, we need to reform the sanctuary city law to the extent any of these folks are in this country illegally and causing mayhem. They should be on the next flight home to where they came from. And most importantly, 50% of violent crime in this city occurs in only 3.5% of the city blocks. Violent crime particularly, which is what really matters, tends to be very localized, and it's localized in the subway system as well. It is not random. So you have to identify the concentrated hotspots, and you flood the zone. You declare a state of emergency in areas in which the local community is being terrorized, and work with the local community. And instead of defunding the police, I want to double down and put more police in the neighborhood, not as an occupying force, but working in collaboration with the law-abiding citizens in those areas. Everybody knows who the bad guys are. Everybody knows who's dealing drugs and where they're dealing drugs. It's happening right now in Washington Square Park as an open-air drug market. That's a disgrace.
Whitney, we don't have much time left. I want to talk about something other than crime, and I want to talk about the trend that has been developing over the course of decades. But you have the city's richest people moving to Florida, and I think Eric Adams actually once said that he would go to Palm Beach and get them back. Is that something that is a priority for you, having that tide reverse of wealthy people leaving the city and eroding the tax base?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, here's a shocking statistic for you. So big picture, it's not just rich people. The vast majority of the people leaving New York City, the 500,000 people we've lost since 2000, are working class people who simply are fed up with crime and disorder, and they can't afford to live here. But keep in mind, 1% of our taxpayers, the richest 1% of New Yorkers, pay half the city's income taxes. So it's devastating financially to our tax base and funding everything. We're a very high cost city, of course. When those folks are moving, I know a lot of those folks, and they're fed up with the same things that middle class people are fed up with. Since 1970, New York State has lost 13 House seats due to people leaving the state. A lot of that's in New York City. Guess how many seats since 1970 Florida has gained? 13. This is not a coincidence, and it's not just due to sunny weather. We Democrats in blue cities and blue states that we've controlled have not been managing them very well. People are voting with their feet, and I'm determined to reverse that, at least in my hometown.
You know, one of the big problems for New Yorkers has been the cost. It's difficult to keep up with, housing costs. I think the average rent is about $4,500 across Manhattan. Those costs have increased about 10% this year, about 30% since 2019. And of course, high taxes play a huge part in that as well. It must make Florida look pretty appetizing. What you can get in Florida for $4,500 a month is fantastic, and then no income taxes on top of it. How do you plan to change that?
Yes, I mean, look, after crime, disorder, and safety, the number one issue New Yorkers are concerned about is the unaffordable cost of living, and the biggest piece of that is, of course, housing. And look, I'm the only business person in the race. It's a crowded field of all career politicians, with one exception: one business person, one person who can bring a completely fresh perspective. And my appeal is bypassing the Democratic Party machine, going straight to the voters and saying, if you want change, I'm the only change agent in the race. Housing is going to be a big piece of it. I'm probably the only guy in the race that understands supply and demand. The reason housing is so expensive in New York is we have a 1.4% vacancy rate, because a lot of people still want to live in New York, but nobody can build any new housing. The city council just last week passed a watered down bill that eases some of the ridiculous zoning regulations. Again, that the sort of radical lefties took a good idea, which I support, which is sensible zoning. They went way too far and make it impossible to build any new supply. Hence, prices have been soaring out of control. So I'm going to push super hard to take what the city council passed last week, and we need to do double or triple that to ease the regulatory burden and zoning restrictions that make it impossible to build new housing, get a lot of new housing built, and that will bring down costs.